Hi, Luke. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Susie.
Can you give us a bit of a background about who you are and what you do, and maybe also a bit of background about your access needs? And obviously, we're focusing on learning today, so how they particularly affect your learning experience.
Sure. So, a bit background in my career. I've been in the e-learning space, the training industry for the last 8 years now.
Okay.
Started out as an e-learning developer. Like many, I fell into it by accident. Never really knew the industry existed, but my career before that was in the film industry and the media world. I went to university and studied media production and video. So the creative side has always been very within me.
Yeah.
But one thing I've always struggled with throughout all my learning and all of my career really is learning difficulties. And to give you a bit of background on that, I've got a condition among many called dyspraxia, which really impact learning, especially things like coding, logic, subjects like maths or programming really make it difficult. And that's always caused a lot of stress when I was in school and even in university as well. And even to this day, certain subjects like that really make it difficult for me, cause a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety. And really, when I'm struggling as an adult today, I go straight back into that school mode where you're made to feel stupid. There's not a lot of support there. And it really impacted my confidence and just self-esteem growing up. And it's kind of traveled into the world of work as well. And I think the ironic thing is coming into the industry of training and actual learning itself. And I think that's one of the reasons why I came into this area, even if it was by accident. The reason I stayed is because it's all to do with learning, how to make learning better and how to help people with these learning issues, difficulties, challenges, whatever you want to call it. Makes it a lot easier for me to understand what they might need as well. And bringing that diverse perspective is really important. And also, I've got some physical conditions, chronic pain, and when stress is bad, when I'm not struggling well learning-wise as an adult, my chronic pain can flare up. So that's something else I have to keep in mind, along with my learning difficulties.
Okay, so it sounds like, as you were saying, you have a lot of empathy when you're designing learning content, understanding really, what other learners might be experiencing, maybe similar to what you've experienced as well. So I do remember one of the things that struck me when you were doing your case study for designing accessible learning content, and that was when you were talking about the language that people used and how that had a particularly, a particular impact, a negative impact on your learning experience. I wondered if you could just kind of share that with everybody and explain a bit more about that.
Yeah, so language is an interesting one. We, as training professionals, we want to make sure our learners are learning the content, and especially when it comes to assessments, we try to make them difficult and catch people out. But also from my own learning background as someone with learning difficulties and in that experience of the anxiety and the stress that comes with language, I think we have to be careful that sometimes we make it overly complicated when it doesn't need to be. And especially in the world of compliance training, financial services, where I spent a lot of time in my career there as well, especially in those types of services and industries, language is very formal, very academic even, very lingo based, and it just tried to sound more professional and just try to catch the learners out. But the actual stress it causes is huge for someone like me. Where you have to do the training once a year at, say, a financial services firm, where you have to do it yearly because they need to be compliant with the industry and banking that might be in, for example. But the actual training and the stress that it causes is huge. And if you've only got like a few weeks to do it every year, where some people without the learning conditions that they might have, they can do it in a day. But someone who doesn't have those sort of conditions, it might take them days or even weeks just to complete one sort of training. And it takes you straight back into that world of school and education. And again, your confidence and the impact it makes you feel, it just doesn't make you feel great. And as you're a professional, you're trying to build in your career. But if that comes back to haunt you every time you do a piece of e-learning, it just doesn't make you feel good. And the stress is just huge what it causes.
Okay, so it's almost something that you're dreading then whenever that compliance test is coming up. Okay, so that's so that's a really great insight. Thank you. So is there anything else apart from language that you that causes you, or it did cause you, or can cause you different problems, other problems that you've experienced?
I think just general usability of the learning as well. As training designers, at last, usability is becoming a big part of what we do. And of yourself, you've been pushing the mission and of usability over the years. And I think now that's becoming a big part, just how it's used, the interface, language, and just making it easy for people and just not trying to trick people up, but just making it a nicer experience. I think it's really important now.
Okay, so I think also you mentioned in the in your case study, you mentioned about timing being something that causes you particular issues as well. Is that have I remembered that correctly?
Yeah, that's right. Timing, especially time questions where you've only got, say, like a minute or two to complete the question. That's really difficult. Shuffling questions as well. That can be really hard for people with certain learning challenges. Shuffling answers and shuffling the options in a multi-question assessment. That can be really difficult. So yeah, things like timing and multi-shuffling, that can be really stressful.
Okay, so that's really interesting when we're talking about the sort of distinction, as you were saying, that usability side. So I suppose the way that I talk about that as well as this idea of maybe thinking inclusively. So for me, thinking about some of the things that we talk about are particular kind of accessibility standards that we're trying to meet. So when we talk about the timing, for example, that is actually a web content accessibility guideline or a WCAG standard. So, and what that says to us is that if we do have to impose timing, then we give our learners control over that to meet that requirement. But there are a huge amount of other things that, you know, particularly some of the things that you were talking about, shuffling questions, for example, and the language that you were talking about earlier, that are kind of a little bit beyond just meeting those accessibility standards. And for me, that is part of the kind of thinking about inclusivity. So it's the definition, I suppose, for me, when I try and define what's the difference between the two, is it obviously accessibility is part of that inclusivity, but inclusivity is this idea of making your learners feel considered and welcomed and making sure that everybody is having a positive learning experience. So not just really thinking strictly about, oh yes, we've got to meet all of these particular guidelines that we've got to tick off. But I think it's kind of thinking beyond that, really. So that for me is a really interesting concept. So have you got any strategies if you have got learning practitioners that maybe haven't designed either accessibly or inclusively? What kind of strategies do you use if you're in that situation?
As a learning designer, maybe someone who hasn't got experience designing for learning conditions or learning challenges, I think just speaking to people. Learning conditions are very common now at the moment. And people are becoming more and more open to them. I think educating yourself is just one of the biggest things you can do to help people.
Okay.
That's the first step, just to understand. And you don't need to become an expert in all the different conditions, whether that's dyspraxia, dyslexia, all the different ones that you're probably familiar with.
Yeah.
But just talking to someone who's got them, and also looking at the features and the functions of the software you're using, whether it's a particular storyline, Adobe Captivate. They've all got a lot of controls now for accessibility. I think as designers, developers, it's important to educate yourself on that as well. And also, again, going back to the industry standards, whether it's WCAG or 5308 compliance, I think that's really important. Just get yourself a basic understanding. But the first thing to do is really talk to people and just learn about why it impacts people, and just try and come up with an open mind as well. It really helps.
Okay, so I think when you were talking earlier about this idea of, and I suppose that is something that affects people. I think when we're designing learning assessments, particularly, is we might be kind of working within the constraints of, you know, organisations wanting things to be done in a certain way. Sometimes you mentioned earlier, kind of legal compliance as well. Mm-hmm. So there are sometimes constraints on what we're doing when we're creating learning. But I think for me, certainly when I spoke to you, I remember having your interview having such an impact on me, because everything that you were talking about that was causing you issues, really, you know, I had no idea. You know, they were all things that I had done in the past. You were talking about shuffling, randomizing questions, you know, sometimes not giving feedback if it's a compliance type, you know, assessment that we're doing. Sometimes we're kind of constrained by not providing feedback, for example. But I think for me, it just really opened my mind as to a different perspective. And I think that's, you know, I think the impact that you had on my practice and how I thought about assessments was just huge. And that's really part of the reason that I wanted you to come on and share your experience really today.
Yeah, and since I did the case study, a lot of people have actually reached out to me on LinkedIn. Ever since they've done your course or your training, they reach out to me and saying how much it impacted them. They've learned new things. And I think the basics of it really goes back to treating learners as adults. I think as we become training designers, we almost go back into the teaching mode. We talk about users being learners, but we forget they're adults, they're professionals, and we try to make it more complex than it has to be. And I think
Right.
some people enjoyed school, but lots of people didn't enjoy school, and we don't want to be treated as children, especially in the workplace. And like you say, giving people control, whether that's timed questions or just the functionality or the language. One of the things that I really can't stand in e-learning, which a lot of us are guilty of, is talking down to our users in the language that we use. Again, we go back into that teacher mindset where we try to have to talk to them like they're children, but they're adults, they're professionals. And again, it's just making it a positive experience and just trying to get people to enjoy it.
Yeah, I agree. So it's that kind of clear language rather than kind of, as you say, maybe being, maybe not quite getting the tone right, that kind of clarity and really consistently, making sure that your language is easy to understand and people haven't got so much time anyway to do their learning. So anything that you can do to make it as clear and concise as possible, that's brilliant. So I suppose then what you were saying earlier that struck me was listening to your learners. So I hope that this interview that we've done now, when people can kind of actually hear you talking about your experiences, will have as big an impact on other people as it has on me. So thank you ever so much for sharing your lived experience. Have we got maybe one final key takeaway, or have you said everything?
I think I've said everything, but the one thing I will say is learn as much as you can about learning disabilities. I know it can be difficult because there's a lot of misconceptions, there's a lot of stereotypes about learning disabilities. Whether that's what we see in the news and how it's represented, but really talk to people, whether that's in your disability networks in your company or just going around sort of finding somewhere to educate yourself. There's lots of great organisations, especially someone who has got the challenges like I have. I think the more we learn about it and the more word and the word gets out there, I think it'll just be so much more good that we can bring to what we do as trainers.
Brilliant. Okay, thanks again for your time, Nick. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Susie.